In this video I want to show you how you can turn this into this. And I made this with Arturia Pigments, which doesn't only happen to be some super amazing synthesizer, but also some kind of cool drum machine if you use it in the right way. And in this video I want to show you what I did and what also you can do and explore with in order to add this kind of organic, generative feel to your own drum beats. And even if you don't use pigments, I think you can still take away quite some good stuff from this video, because it's generally about how you can modulate drum beats with sequencers, LFOs, random functions in order to break the kind of static and repetitive 2-bar, 4-bar feeling. Let's listen to the patch once more for a little longer so you can see how things slightly vary over time and how there's never going to be exactly the same rhythm or pattern that has been there before. First of all, you have to decide whether you want to use a sample or the internal synth engine. And I used the sample because I am currently also sampling my Vermona Performer because I want to make a little pack out of it. So I had some sounds there already and wanted to try them. And if you click on the sample itself, you can either pick some from the internal library, or you can also import your own ones. And if you want to import some more, you have to click this icon on the bottom right side. It's a little difficult to find sometimes. So then you can just select it, and here I have it under B. I also had one under A, but selected B because I liked it more. And then I also activated the sequencer because we need it in order to trigger the right rhythm. And also I added some probability to not always trigger all notes, but I also locked the first, the fifth, the 9th and the 13th, because this is like the 1, 2, 3, 4, where we want to have constantly a kick and a snare, which you will see later that it's kind of giving some structure to our rhythm. But apart from that, if we don't do anything else, it just sounds like this. And while this can be fun and sometimes also be used in order to create some tension and some intensity in the drums, we also want to be able to have less notes triggered. And what I really like to do is to go back to the synth engine and use some function modes, because here you see function 1 just has some opening in the beginning, and you can apply it to the volume of our kick sample. And in order to do it, you have to bring the volume down to 0. And now I activate this engine 1 volume function envelope. So now it always triggers kind of on 1 and 3. So we're kind of certain that all the kick drums on 1 and 3 will always be there and therefore give some structure to our rhythm. For the variation, we're going to use some random modes, and they are just so amazing and I love them so much. Here it's random 1, which is on binary, because binary just either triggers or doesn't trigger. So it's perfect for giving some variation to rhythmic parts. And it's not applied directly to the output volume, but to some envelope, because this way we can control the sound a bit better, because if I apply the random directly to the volume, it sounds a little too harsh, or it kind of doesn't sound so smooth. There are some glitches sometimes. So here it's going to be envelope 2, who's triggered by random 1. This is a great thing you can sometimes do if applying it directly doesn't give you the desired sound, because now we can fine-tune it with the envelope who looks like this. And then this envelope is actually also routed to the volume, but there's one more thing to it, which is that it's sidechained by the function 1, which means it doesn't trigger on the 2 and 4 because on the 1 and 3, because there we already have the triggers from our function envelope. And if they both trigger at the same time, it just gets twice as loud, and we don't want to have this effect. So that you have to put to -1, so it's basically always ducked when the function is hitting. Otherwise it's enhanced, so if it's on +1. And now we have some nice little kick drum variation. And if you want to have more variation, you can just increase the probability, and that's also a great knob you can assign to some MIDI controllers. So if you just want to have more kick drums, you just increase the value for it. And if it's all the way at the left side, there's not going to be any variation. And you also heard that we have some softer notes sometimes because the envelope is open for a little longer. It has some release, which kind of happened accidentally, that I was playing around and discovered that I kind of like this sound, because this way we get some almost ghost notes that sometimes get triggered and create some nice interaction with here just the kick drum, but also later with the whole beat to just enhance the rhythmic feeling. And yeah, that's just a personal preference, but I just liked it. Now the snare is where it can get really funky, because as you can see, there are multiple samples, and I'll get to this in a second. Let's first check the envelope, because again I created some function mode, but this time we have the hit here because we have the bass drum on 1 and 3, and so we want to have the snare on 2 and 4, and that's where you have to put it if you want to have this type of beat. And then we do the same thing as we did with the kick drum, we apply it to the volume. So here we activate the function 2 that it applies to the volume of engine 2. But it's not exactly the sound we had in the intro, and that's because currently we're only triggering one of those 3 samples, because now we get to this interesting part. If you click on map inside the sampler, you have different modes to choose from. So for example, if you go to single mode, you just select one of those samples here, it always triggers, and you can store up to 6 samples, but you can also do some more creative stuff with it. For example, randomize it completely, so it's always going to be somewhere, it's not up to you. Or you use the sample pick mode, where you use this knob in order to select the sound you want to have, but this knob you can also connect to modulations. So in this case we use the function 2 mode, which we also use for the backbeat, to always bringing this knob to the C sample on 2 and 4, because that's our louder sample. And let's just listen now how it sounds like. And now we can use A and B as some sort of ghost notes and rhythm variation. So you can see if I go to the edit menu that B is a little lowered in the gain, and also A is panned a little to the left side and B is panned a little to the right side. So it's a little more dancey and dynamic. And then I used one of those LFOs. I have to see which one. This one. So LFO1 is just some sample and hold free running LFO that always sends some new random message. And if I select this one, you can see here that it basically moves around, and on 2 and 4 it's supposed to go to C. Now there's another cool thing, that it doesn't always perfectly work. So sometimes it doesn't trigger, and I'm not so sure why, because theoretically it should. But actually I like this, because this way we get even more randomness and it sounds less like some program MIDI beat. And in order to hear those variations now, we also copy exactly the same approach we used for the kick drum variations. So we use a random, and here it's going to be random 2. It's also binary. You see here the variations, a little more probability, and some envelope. In this case, envelope 3. You can see it's routed to random 2 and already has this mapping to engine 2 volume. So I'm going to activate it. Also the sidechain again to the snare backbeat, so function 2. Same thing as with the kick drum, and then we get this kind of beat. Now, in order to enhance the beat a little and bring some more character to it, I also used a filter. It was actually still selected. I forgot to switch this off, but without any kind of movement, because I used those function modes to also trigger the filters. So naturally it's now down to 1700 Hertz, so the sound is a little filtered. But whenever kick drum or snare drum triggers, and I only use the 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 positions, I open the filter. So function 1 is assigned to the filter 1 cutoff, and also function 2 is assigned to the filter 1 cutoff. And now we just get a little more movement, which I kind of find really pleasant. I also must say here that I used the filter splitting. So now sample 1 and 2 are going to filter 1. And here on the right side, I selected that they are going to be treated separately, because this kind of weird hi-hat noise thing is going to be sent through the second phaser filter, which I'll show you in a second. But just so you know, So filter 1 is just kick and snare drum, and this one is not doing anything right now because the utility engine is not active yet. And this filter splitting is a great thing to treating signals inside the synth individually. I really like this. By the way, if you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, you can quickly hit the like button because it really helps showing this video to some more people. Thanks. Next, let's check this noise, or let's say it's kind of a hi-hat imitation. And here I really enjoy just browsing through those different sounds of noise and selecting something without overthinking it. And I just play a bit with the tune and really like to apply some LFO to it because you can just make the sound less static by doing this. And here I chose LFO2. It's also some sample and hold random kind of thing. And just to add some variation. And this one goes to filter 2 as I mentioned, so it doesn't go through this first filter, it's only kick and snare. This one we're going to send through this phaser here. Which is cool already, but I like to add even more variation to it, which I did with another LFO, because the LFO3 is kind of slow and it's perfect for just modulating the cutoff here of this phaser, because then you get this continuous cool phasing effect that I find to be extremely enjoyable for everything that is kind of noisy or in this kind of hi-hat direction. And also this one is not so important, but I self-modulate the phase, so here it also changes a little more, and actually it's really a small thing. There's one more thing I didn't mention yet because I just realized from the utility engine so far we were only hearing noise 2 because the volume of noise 1 is on 0, maybe you've noticed it, because I used some combinate to modulate this one. So the combinate is basically a thing where you can use other modulation sources like random, so here it's random 1 and random 2, to generate some new kind of curves. This is some section I have to explore a little further, I'm not some expert on yet, but here I just used it because all the randoms were used already and I wanted to occasionally bring in this hi-hat sound. So let's activate it, and we again added some other layer of irregularity. And now we're almost done. There are a few tiny more things, like I added some little effects like a bit crusher. It always makes the sound a little more badass, kind of. And just some compressor to make it a little tighter, but very tiny bits of gain reduction. And also there's some delay that only sometimes get triggered from random 3. Because this way we every now and then get some other type of additional rhythm that is irregular and just without really noticing it adds to this overall vibe of not being too boxy. There's one more tiny thing, which is that you can see on the aux there's some reverb set up, and we just use the function 2, which is the snare function mode for the 2 and 4 snare, to send the little bit of the signal into the reverb. So all the time the snare hits, we also get some little bit of reverb. It's a tiny thing, but really enjoyable. So just see what happens. Pigments is also some super powerful tool for creating sequences because it can create multiple sequences with their own notes and shapes at once. And if you want to know how to do it, I warmly invite you to check out this video. Otherwise, I also made some online classes about synthesizer basics or a systematic approach on learning about rhythm, and you're also warmly invited to check them out. You can find all the links down below in the description. And apart from that, I wish you inspiration with whatever it is that you create and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!